we are moving right along in our agenda. We have coming up next, we have Eric Buehlmann from yesterday. He is going to share some more insights and information on, I don't know, all things federal issues and policy and advocacy. And I put a topic in the agenda for him, but I'm not going to limit what he would like to share after, talking with different partners groups and listening to our group yesterday and some of the questions. I know he probably has a lot more specifics that he could share that would be great for us to hear. And again, appreciate him joining us on a Saturday.
No problem. I know you guys just finished. I mean, I'm fine. I'm actually editing other stuff, but if you guys need a break between, I'm fine with a little break if you need one.
Well, again, we put you at the end of the meeting, so it's between you and at the end of the day.
My organization does that to me too, and I keep waiting for the rotten tomatoes to come out and stop talking. Well, first, thanks for having me back again today. I'd be interested if there were any questions or thoughts from the presentations you had with the House and Senate staff, if there's anything I could answer for you.
We had a great conversation with Craig Kennedy from Adderholtz. He talked a lot and gave us a lot to think about and a lot of ideas.
Great, that's wonderful. And a suggestion I would make, now that you sort of have some names in certain offices, if there's something that's occurred in the news that you've been involved in or your projects that you're doing on, feel free to share it with them. Oh, my head became big. Feel free to share it with them. So, once you guys' projects are done, I would circle back with them, thank them for having had a conversation with you, and you wanted to share the results and findings of what you had done through your projects. So I would very much say, and if there's something that's popped up in the news that really impacts people with disabilities, send a link to them, and make yourself a resource. So I think there's lots of different ways that you can continue to foster a relationship with those offices, and make you seen as a resource for them. So just keep in contact with them as much as you can. I was actually enjoying the presentation, the end part I caught. So I'm thinking I am a social media dinosaur, so I should have her come present to me and learn, because it sounded very interesting.
Yeah, she has a lot of knowledge with that and does it really well. There she is, and she's still here.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that.
No, I wish I should have jumped on a heck of a lot earlier and learned more. So, do you mind just putting up the presentation?
Which one?
It'd be the other one. I don't remember what the title was. It's not the message box one. It's the other one. Assuming that I remember my names in my presentations.
Sir?
Yeah.
This is Jenny Lux. I'm just wondering, what is, in your opinion, best way to become that resource, that advocate that politicians turn to?
The way I would say is probably the best way is to be a good source of information, and make it, make them aware that you have sort of your pulse on what's going on in their communities. And I think sharing those news stories, reaching out to them, providing them that kind of information and raising these issues to them shows that you're a good source of information. And again, I think I said this yesterday, and if I didn't, I'll say it today. You know, a lot of these staff
Oh,
will travel home for their breaks and try to meet them face to face and have a conversation. That would be my suggestion.
thank you, sir.
No, no problem. I'm a sir. I don't feel old enough to be a sir. Any luck on the presentation? Because I'm not seeing it.
I had to log in my VPN and log into some other
Oh,
things that
I'm
I
sorry.
had. No, it didn't go through earlier when I tried, and then I kind of forgot to go back. So it's called messaging. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's see which one pops up. Or let me go look.
It's pulling up now. So hold on just a second.
Yeah, it's going to be the messaging one.
How's that? Whoops.
Oops, security alert. Right.
Do I trust the content?
Yeah, we're going to be doing our virtual annual conference is starting on Monday. So I've got 3 sessions coming up. So I got to do this something similar. Luckily, I'm not the speaker most of the time. So today I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit more about messaging, sort of building off of the message box discussion that we started yesterday, but also how to, you know, interact, sort of building off the question Jenny asked about interact with members, their staff, get their attention, be a resource for them. I am not getting the ability to move the pages. Oh, so next slide. So as we talked about yesterday, the first key to advocacy is develop your message. All the tips and tricks for contacting people won't do much if you don't have a clear, concise, contrastive, and convincing message. And so we talked about the message box a little bit yesterday. So first you got to develop it, which is really what the message box is about. And then the second part is you got to deploy your message. And so a great message plus a great product equals great grassroots. We talked about, creating, I forgot to take that part out. We talked about the message box, which is really, I think, the next several slides in the messaging, but there might be a little bit more there. And then the product is how we do some tips to communicate the message following the creation of it. Next slide. So as I said yesterday, think about the message box in terms of sort of creating the pluses and the minuses and sort of seeing the argument from all sides. It helps you create sort of that really concise, really good message, but it's also going to really help you when you're having those discussions with the members and the staff. It's, being able to, answer their questions, having those thoughts in your head already on where to go is going to be really clear. So as this says, sort of the basics is know the policymaker. You need to develop your message. You need to deploy your message. It's pretty simple, as this says, but really most people don't do this. About 95% of the people don't do the basics. But if you do the basics, it'll make you elite. And one of the ways, now is very different in terms of knowing policymakers than it used to be. There is a ton more information out there on the internet. There's a lot more news coverage of votes and those kinds of things. So people have a lot more basic information of policymakers. One thing I would suggest you do before you have a meeting with a senator or a representative or a state legislator, check out their website. Look at what they're talking about in the news. Look at what they're talking about for their press releases. Sort of as it's been told, it's sort of a form of cyber stalking. See what they're talking about. It may not definitively always relate to disability, but again, as I talked about yesterday, pretty much every public policy issue you have, there's a disability component to it. So if they talk a lot about housing, then you can talk to them about, the need for affordable and accessible housing for people with disabilities and being in the community and stuff like
She's
that.
got a sister and her partner.
Oh, okay. Let me just finish this and then I'll get to that. And so that's making sure that you have an idea of what your policymaker is. But you may also stumble upon some things where a disability group, a disability organization, a coalition, or someone has given a member an award. And that's another way to potentially look at their interest and figure out where their interest might be on disability. But again, if they don't have anything specific on disability, you can always come back to disability in their interests, be it housing, be it education, be it employment, be it whatever. Just tie it back into disability. And so that's one way you can definitely learn to know your policymaker. There's also a lot more information out there nowadays on congressional staff. You can find a lot of information about their backgrounds by Googling them. That's what I use. And we have some services that also gives us a lot of information, but a lot of this is public information that you can get to get an idea of what school they went to, what their educational background might be. And you can also look at what they've written in terms of letters or press releases or quotes or those kinds of things, which can also help them understand a lot about those staff before you meet. Let me circle back to this question that was in the chat. Can you explain the organizational structure of NDRN as it relates to our local, I'm assuming DRNs is disability rights, is ADAP. What does the deputy director oversee? What is the flow of information from our disability rights and resources in Birmingham as it relates to you? So we are the voluntary, and I will stress voluntary, membership association for the 57 protection and advocacy agencies across the country. In Alabama, it's ADAP, is the governor designated protection and advocacy agency in that state. All 57 belong to us. We started out back in the early 80s as a purely voluntary membership association and really focused on the membership aspects, providing sort of the basics of membership services. And one of those basics of membership services is being the voice and the face on Capitol Hill, for the most part, for the PNAs, since we're the ones that are in DC. We have the more quick ability to go up for meetings, have discussions, those kinds of things. We also can do a lot more lobbying than our members can do. There's restrictions on how much they can't use federal money to lobby. And so they have to be careful about how they phrase things. We do not have those restrictions, so we're allowed to lobby and be able to say things more definitively at times than the PNA can if they only have federal money. And so that's how we sort of started out. We then sort of grew as more training and technical assistance money came about because of the programs that create the PNA network. We gathered up all of those training and technical assistance grants. And so the bigger part of NDRN now is our training and technical assistance side. We answer questions from the protection and advocacy systems on federal law. We provide them training on best practices. We help develop, fact sheets. We keep track of the law and make sure that we're updating our members on changes in federal law and those kinds of things. And part of what we do, as I said, next week is we're doing the virtual part of the annual conference for a week. There's going to be like 45, 46 different sessions of training and technical assistance to our members. And then in June, we're going to have a week-long in-person part of the annual conference, which is really going to be sort of hands-on ways to, really day-long. I'm having a 2-day public policy institute, but day-long institute, really digging into providing sort of those hands-on experiences about how to do certain things. So that's really our biggest part of our organization. Right now, the way we're structured, we have sort of 5 deputy executive directors. We have one focused on legal aspects, one focused on training, myself in public policy, one focused on external relations, and as sort of every other organization of our side needs to have, we have a chief financial officer who focuses on the finance and sort of the administration. So my duties are overseeing sort of the public policy team. You met them all yesterday. So there's sort of 4 of us. There's 3 people that I oversee. And then we also have a number of interns that we have come in over the course of the year. Right now, we're sort of at the highest I've ever had. We've got 6 interns, 4 of them from the University of California system, 2 from City College of New York. And so that's sort of our biggest group we've ever had. We've had a great relationship with AAPD, the American Association of People with Disabilities, who has a summer internship program. This is going to be the first year in many years that it'll be in person. And I know I've got one from that organization. There's another one that's reached out interested. I have to look at their material. But that's sort of what we do. In terms of the flow of information from ADAP to us, there's a number of email lists. There's one focused for the executive directors. There's one focused on the legal directors. Those are usually used for training and technical assistance in a lot of respects. But if there's been a great court decision or there's been something really exciting that the P&A has done, the executive director or the legal director will share sort of the press release or the decision or those kinds of things. And so we get information that way from ADAP to us in DC. Probably the biggest way we get the information is every single program that ADAP has requires, 8 of the 9, I'm not sure the rep payee program does, requires what's called a program performance report at the end of the year. And what that is sort of a recitation of how many people were served, various demographics of those people, what kind of disabilities, male, female, age, living environments, race, ethnicity, and then stories about the work they did. Those get submitted to the federal government. We get copies of most of them, and we review them and pull in what we think are great stories out for our database, and we use them in our policy work. So that's another way we get information from ADAP to us at NDRN. We also have an ability to pull news stories and track, if there's a mention of Protection and Advocacy or Disability Rights California or Alabama Disability Advocacy Program, we'll get an alert. And so we get all these stories that our members are mentioned in. And that's another way we keep track of it. And then probably the last way is that one-on-one contact between our trainers and technical assistance people and the staff of the P&As. That's an important way in flow of information about what's going on in Alabama. In terms of what we do in DC back to our members, I use the email list to send out notices, requests to sign on to letters. important things that are occurring that will impact the P&As. We have a monthly study hall call, which is open to all public policy people to sort of talk and discuss stuff. We have quarterly calls, and then we will do some presentations. As I said, I've got 3 sessions next week, one focused on how to employ self-advocates around public policy, another focused on sort of how, if you increase your outreach to underserved or unserved populations, how that can make your communications and public policy work better. And then the ever exciting educating versus lobbying, what's what, what's good, what's bad, what can you do, what can't you do. And then, as I said, we've got a 2-day Public Policy Institute in June, where we're going to sort of do the nuts and bolts of public policy work and walk through that for people and have discussions. So that's another way that information flows. I hope that's a very long-winded answer to your question. Kim, if you need anything more, feel free to ask it now.
That was great information. Thank you so much.
No problem. Close this, or I won't be able to read anything. Can I get the next slide? So again, as we were talking about, know your policymaker. You want to learn to love politics. The P in politics, as this says, it's not a dirty word. Public policy is crafted in the arena of politics. So you want to get to know the players who compete in that arena and the rules. And as this says, relationships are the key. It's those, you know, as I think I said this yesterday, which is the first time they reach out to you potentially for some information, you know, you've sort of crossed that threshold, that you are someone that they now are interested in learning more about and willing to come to you for those kinds of information and get that kind of material. So it's not a pretty world. I mean, if you may have heard the phrase before, you know, 2 things you don't want to watch is sausage making and how laws are made. Yeah, it's somewhat true. I've never watched sausage making, so I can't really speak for that one, but I've been involved in public policy for pretty much my entire life. The thing is a lot of the basics you'll hear, and I will show my age here, and I don't know if you haven't seen it, Google how a bill becomes a law from Schoolhouse Rock. That is what I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. That is the basics, and that will provide you the basics. And a lot of books will provide you the basics. But there's really a lot more pressure points and a lot more ways that you can impact the making of laws and policy that aren't talked about and aren't really known until you sort of get into it. There's lots of steps and lots of little minutiae into making laws. And if you've got that connection and that relationship to the individual, you have a better shot at getting into those little areas that people don't talk about, that you just didn't know about. So it's forging those relationships really are the key. Next slide. Again, developing your message first deals with the what you know and how well you keep them informed. It's a critical step that a lot of people forget about. And so using that message box as a tool, it forces you to look at the message from all the angles. And as this says, one of the first mistakes people make is that they'll get mad and they'll jump to action, but they haven't really thought about what the message is before you write the letter or pick up the phone. And I'll tell you this, is they will get members of Congress and state legislators, I'm assuming at the same level, I never worked there, so I can't speak for that definitively, will get a lot of what look like the same kind of form letter. And it's become even more of a case now than when I was up on the Hill, because you've got all these different services that'll produce a very similar letter. And one of the things that'll stand out to you when you're sorting mail and looking at what you're going to be responding to is something that looks a little bit different. So you may have 50 of the same canned responses, same things. You may be sending a letter on the same topic, but something that looks different than these standard paragraphs that are out there. Or if you get those kinds of alerts, like this, what we call salsa alerts, we use salsa as our communications and grassroots tool. But if you get one of those alerts and you have the opportunity to put in a little bit of your own thoughts and a little bit of your own story, try to take advantage of that, because it will look different. It will stand out from all the other form letters that will look exactly the same. So the more you can potentially personalize it a little bit, that's really the critical step to be able to do there, because that will stand out and someone will definitively read that letter because it looks different. And they'll be like, huh, I wonder what the difference is. And they'll spend the time looking at it. And your personal material that you've added there will be what the person reads. So if you get one of those alerts to do, and one of those outreaches to just click here to send a message to your representative, your senator, your state legislator, try to spend a little time if it offers you the opportunity to personalize it a little bit. It doesn't need to be 5 or 6 pages of material. It can just be a couple sentences. But that way it stands out and will be a different looking thing than all the other canned responses they're getting from other people. And again, if you want to do something longer and spend some more time on it, spend your time developing that message, really thinking about it from all sides, come up with that short, sweet message using the message box tool that we talked about yesterday. Then, it's harder to do that in a phone call in some respects. But once you sort of create that connection with someone, you can leave them a voicemail and do the sort of the longer message than you would be able to do normally. But emailing, using the forms that all members, at least members of Congress, have on their website to leave a message can be very good. Or write the snail mail letter. And that takes a little bit longer to get there because there's more safety procedures because of the ricin attacks from the late 90s. So mail takes a lot longer to get there than an electronic message, but if you want to, feel free to do that also. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get there. Next slide. A message is not the entire letter you write. The message is not an issue. It's not a slogan, and it's not a strategy. As this says, a message is the point you want to get across when people read your letter. And again, that's sort of where the being a little bit different comes from. A lot of times you'll see the basic slogan, you'll see the basic mention of an issue, but that doesn't really get your point across. And so being able to have that couple sentences, which are really sort of tight, talks about the issue, why you think it's important, why you think something needs to be done, and this is the thing that needs to be done. Again, I think will get people's attention on the Hill and will stand out from sort of the different kinds of things they get, which tends to be a lot of canned material without a lot of, I'm going to say thought necessarily put into how they're crafting the argument. So the more you can sort of concisely come up with your message using that message box tool, try to do it and go forward from there, because I think it'll just get people's attention and get them thinking and get them focused on an issue. Next slide. So message development, have a point and get to it. Start with the point you want to convey and work backwards. It seems simple, but most people don't start with the point to their message. Again, although it only takes, it take a little longer than 3 minutes, but that's what I wrote. 3 minutes to do the message box exercise. Not doing the exercise is never an excuse to not write a letter or make the call. This exercise is optional, but knowing what your point is before you communicate is not. You don't necessarily always need to use the message box tool, but definitely you've got to have your point in your head before you make that call, before you write that letter, before you add the material to some kind of salsa alert. You've just got to make sure that you're clear on what your point is and what you really want to convey. And just saying, please pass S or HR, whatever, isn't really enough. You really need to, the point needs to be, this bill, I'll go back to the direct care workers. This bill will increase direct care worker pay. It is important because of ding, ding, ding. This is why this needs to occur. A sentence there. This is why S, HR, whatever, needs to pass to help address this critical issue. But something short and sweet that sort of is more than just pass the bill, because they'll see lots of those. You've then provided sort of some more input and some more information on why it's important to pass that bill. And you've made it a little bit personal, which also then tells to them that this is something that's really important to you because it is going to have a personal impact on you. So the more you can sort of think about what your point is before you jump into the communication aspect, that's really great and really important. Next slide. Getting to yes. In the political world, ooh, bad sentence there. You want to get to yes, no, or maybe. Ideally, you would love to get to yes, but that's not going to happen every single time. But as this says, to get to yes, you're going to have to hear a lot of no's and maybes. But every no and maybe is an opportunity, and you need to keep that in mind. And so how do you get to yes, no, or maybe? Because you want them, you don't want them to be non-committal. You're trying to get them to say something, either affirmative, yes, or no, or it maybe, which means they'll at least consider it. Clearly, again, yes is the answer most of the time we're looking for. Sometimes we want them to vote no, but yes is usually what we want, and that means they'll support something. Or we could do the opposite and say yes, they will oppose something. But again, maybe a no means that at least they've heard you. And if they say no, one of the big things there is make sure you get from them why they're saying no, because then that gives you information which you can then think about and counter, rebut it, come up with your arguments on why no might not be the best. Maybe at least they're thinking about it. You can also use that opportunity to say, hey, why are you sort of in the middle with a maybe? And then again, you might get information which is critically important to be able to say to someone, okay, this is where their concern is. And so therefore, or this is why, this is something they need to support it. And so hopefully those kinds of things will provide you a lot of information and input to be able to then get them to move from maybe to yes, or might be able to get people from no to yes, or even just to maybe. Now, the thing I'm going to say is there is pretty much out there, I'm going to put it this way. You are not going to find a politician that's going to 100% agree with you all the time. Do not expect that. And there may also just be times where you get a politician's vote the way you want them to be, not that much. And that's just sort of the way it is. You may get them on some things and you may not get them on others. And, especially when you're looking at Republicans versus Democrats, you may not get them may not get Republicans on the spending stuff, but it's possible you can get them on a rights issue or something else like that. Don't just foreclose discussions with members, either your state legislature or your federal legislature, because they don't always agree with you, because it's very rare you're going to find it, well, and I don't think you ever will, that you would find a politician that agrees with you 100% on every single issue. So sometimes you just have to go with, yeah, I won't get them on this, but I can potentially get them on this. And so you got to take your wins where you get it, and you need to be very forceful with your praise and thank yous for when you get them. And then feel free to express your disappointment and your concerns with votes where you don't get them. Try not to be too personal and attacking in those, but you can express those disappointments, but if there are times that you agree, let them know that and be supportive of that. So, but yeah, you want to try to get them into a yes, no, or maybe, because at that point they've at least said something to you in response, and you can figure out where they are and where they're not. And helpfully then use that information to get them to a place that you would like to get them to. Next slide. So here we're going to talk about a tale of two constituents. You've got constituent A and you've got constituent B. Next slide. Constituent A visits the legislature, describes the problem, has many concerns and questions, but doesn't really have a clear-cut solution, and doesn't ask the legislator to support any particular solution, or at times potentially oppose a solution. So in this case, you haven't gotten any commitment, and you might feel good as a constituent, but you've really squandered an opportunity. You didn't get to the yes, no, or maybe. You've talked to them, you've educated them, but you haven't sort of done that next step of, here is something that needs to be done. Could be a bill, could be an overall policy solution. So let's say, going back to direct support care workers, maybe there's a bill that raises the pay or increases training or something like that that you support. That needs to be the thing that you need to talk about as the particular solution. But it may also just be, here is what's happening. This is what's going on the ground. This is where things are in Alabama. We need to increase pay for direct care support workers. We need to increase training. We need to do X, because this is going to lead to better outcomes for people with disabilities, those that are elderly. It's going to lead for better jobs for these individuals. It's going to do all these kinds of things. You may not have a direct bill number, but if you get their attention, you get a, yes, we should do something, then that's going to mean that they may look around and try to get a bill introduced. They may try to introduce it themselves. They may work with others to get something introduced. So that's, you're looking to get that kind of commitment. You don't want to just educate them and leave them with nothing. You want to try to get to that next step of yes, no, or maybe. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So constituent B clearly describes the problem, identifies a solution, and asks for a commitment. For example, will you support HB 2500? This shows you know what you want, your solution, and you ask for it. Again, this does seem pretty simple, but a lot of people will not take that last step. They won't go for this, the ask of the solution, or which could be, as I said earlier, could be a specific bill, could also just be a general policy of, we really need to do this. In the direct care workers, we need to increase their pay. We need to be better, they need to be better trained. But you need to have that next ask. And because once you make that ask of will you support this? Can we increase the pay for direct care workers? At that point, they're gonna have to say one of the three words. They may say possibly they'll think about it, which I would then put into a maybe category. But they've had to at least respond to your solution. and given you some idea and input of where their thinking might be. Next slide. I love my little owl. Any questions on what I've talked about? And ideas and thoughts and concerns you may have about either making those asks, what those meetings are like. Oh, before we do that, the one thing I will say, and I saw this many a time with meetings, is don't go in being overly awed, impressed with staff and members of Congress. They're like everybody else. They have issues going on in their life. They have things that are good. They have things that are bad. They have only so much time. They're human beings. So they're not some being that knows all and be all. Just treat them as humans, human beings, as you'd want to be treated, with respect, and provide them the information. So, you don't need to be awed. You don't need to be scared. They're seriously looking for information from their constituents and others to help them make decisions, as much as you're willing to give them the information and provide them potential ideas for solutions. So they don't, they're covering 5 billion issues every single day. This member of Congress or state legislator, this may not be, like, if you're talking to them on education, that may not be one of their major focuses. So providing that kind of information is going to help them understand the issue a little bit more and get them to focus on it, and give them some background that they've just never really had before. So take advantage of those kinds of things and go from there. Any questions or thoughts or anything that I can answer for you? I put them all to sleep. Sorry.
Hey, Eric, this is James. I'll just try to give kind of a question to connect from our prior speakers, especially the folks who work for Senator Tuberville and Representative Adderholt. I think often, you and many of us spend a lot of our time thinking about disability issues, but the folks that we're dealing with in these congressional offices do not necessarily think about these issues, and may not even have kind of a specific assignment to focus. So I think, for example, we spent an hour with Representative Adderholt's district representative, and I've had this experience with Senator Shelby. Craig, spent a lot of time talking about a lot of things that are of primary interest to Adderholt and the district, and not as much time talking about issues that many of us are most concerned about. How do you make that connection to try to get their attention to focus on our issues? I think maybe you talked a little bit yesterday and today about focusing on the story. When you start telling someone about what's happening in somebody's life, you might be able to break through. But I think that's a challenge that I know I experience, and I suspect other people here may experience as well.
And it's a huge challenge. Sometimes you can overcome it, but it is not a simple, easy, one-time kind of thing to overcome it. First, you've got to sort of make the connection, get the person's name, find out the member's interest. And then, as best as you can, it's just the repetition at some level of, invite them to have a discussion. Go, if they're going to have town halls, show up at a town hall and make sure you ask a question. Staff will be there with the members at those town halls. give them invites. And usually I choose August for this because that's usually one of the biggest open periods in the congressional schedule. There are definitely a lot of other ones, but that's the one where they're pretty much out of DC and back home for the entire month. You know, early in the year, think about bringing together a couple of, you know, constituents, people, have a topic you want to talk about, invite the member staff to come during the August recess to talk about this topic. Then once you've had that sort of face-to-face meeting with either the member or the staff, then it's just, you know, every once in a while, it doesn't need to be every day, doesn't necessarily need to be every week, you know, following up with, you know, updated information, stories that you might have seen in the local press that focused on that same topic. If you hear of a bill that might solve this issue or an idea, share that with them. You know, it's just being, you've got to be a pest without being an annoyance, is the way I would sort of phrase it. Is you've got to sort of beat it into their head. I mean, the example I'll give is Senator Jeffords' knowledge of campaign finance and election law was extremely minimal when I picked up that topic. And for the senator and started covering it. And in the very beginning, I wouldn't have trusted him to go to a floor or in the meeting or have a meeting with someone to talk about this issue without really having it fully scripted. And that there was just no way he could go talk on his own and have a discussion. It took 2 or 3 years of every once in a while doing a speech on the floor, being involved in meetings with members. And I got to the point where it was like, okay, if he was stopped in the floor or stopped in the hall by someone and asked a question on this, then I would trust him to talk about it and not say something that I'd have to try to figure out how to get around, in all honesty. But it takes a little bit of time because they're focusing on things. It's harder for members because they focus on everything. Staff is really where I think you can make the biggest input and create that connection, try to set up a meeting and get them to come talk to a number of people. If, again, staff usually trail along with members at town halls, go see them there. It's just, and then become a source of information on this topic back to them in either the state office or back in DC, and then repeat the process again the next year. Don't just do a meeting every other year or every 3 years, you know, constantly think about, okay, let's invite them back next year. And maybe there might be a new topic that you need to talk to them about, but there's plenty to talk about in the disability world. But you've got to be that thing that gets them to think about the issue. And then once you send them the next thing, it triggers that memory of what the issue was, and you just keep building upon that. And then eventually they become more knowledgeable on it. Well, they are more knowledgeable on it than they ever would have been without you being that sort of person poking them and saying, hey, think about this. I hope that helps. It's not the easiest thing under the sun to do, and you may have 5 steps forward and 1 step back. So it's my face. Yes, and that's another thing that I would also agree with from Linda is, you know, there's a balance between being, after a while, they may tune you out a little bit. And that's where sort of the coalition work comes from, because they're going to hear the message from multiple people. And then this is also going back to sort of the housing discussion we had a little bit yesterday, where it may not necessarily be your coalition or your face that has the best attention of a member or their staff. It may be someone you're in coalition with, which could be a disability group, may not necessarily be a disability group. And that is the in, because they listen to that person. And that person will then say, yeah, Linda over here she's on spot. She's on target on this one. This is someone you need to listen to. This is something you need to do. And we support what she's asking for. And that's what gets the members' attention. You know, there have been times in the past, like where we have not been, or our member has not been the face that has the members' attention. We had a bill. This was different than our mental health bill, but probably 15 years ago, that we were opposing, and that would have really hurt our members. And we were trying to, there was a Republican in the Senate that was thinking of introducing this bill. And we knew that our member, the Massachusetts PNA, and we knew that us as NDRN didn't have those ins with that member, but the ARC of Massachusetts did. And they were supportive of they were opposing the bill like we wanted. And so we used them to reach out to the member and their staff to basically make the case on why this was a bad bill and that they shouldn't introduce it. And he never introduced it. And so, you know, there are times where you being the face of the discussion is important. But there are also times to have a broader coalition, sometimes of disability groups, sometimes not, to make those cases. And it's, as was said, is that it's your words that are being conveyed to them, but it's coming from another source. And again, that's another way to be the constant, I finally came up with a good analogy, the constant drumbeat of the message without always being from the same drummer. Ooh, I like my analogy. So yeah, having others being able to sort of convey the message is an important thing. And again, on some of these topics, especially in the disability world, I really think that in-person kind of discussion is, and that face-to-face kind of thing is really important to get rid of the stigma. In some ways, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm going to use a picture from ADAP on this one. About 10 years ago, I think it was 10, we started doing a report on the inaccessibility of Amtrak stations, of train stations. And we asked our members to go out and look at train stations and point out where the inaccessibility aspects were, be it on entrances, be it in the parking lot, be it inside the stations, be it on the platforms. And the picture we used on the cover perfectly conveys this. And I can't remember, James, which station it is, but it's a person that's in a wheelchair sitting in front of a station with 2 steps up into the station. And there's no way for them to get into the station because they're the 2 steps. You just look at the picture and you go, yep, I got it. I know what the problem is.
Eric,
now.
it was Tuscaloosa, 1 mile from where I'm sitting right now.
Ah, okay. But it was
number 1 in football, not number 1 in all categories of quality of life.
But it was the perfect picture that conveyed the issue. And at times, I think it's important to get those face-to-face meetings with the staff and with the members to sort of get that, dispel that stigma and those preconceived notions in that member's head. So that's I think critically important. Thank you, Nancy.
Eric,
Block it.
I wanted to just to mention something. I was going to put
Yeah.
it in the chat, but I'll go ahead and say it. The discussion you're having right now about the pictures and how that conveys something is, I want everybody to think back when you first started this partners, and I asked them to, one of their first assignments was to do a picture that say it in 6. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a little play on some of Ernest Hemingway's first one. You have 6 words and you have a picture.
Oh,
So
no,
I
I
asked
don't
them
know that.
all, I asked them all to get one picture and put 6 words in it. It could describe them, it could describe their day, or it could be anything, but just something that represented them. And it took everybody a while to really think about it and get concise with it, but they're just amazing. I'll share it with you. It's a great exercise to have people do, to put the words with the picture. So
I would
very
love to.
powerful.
I
Yeah.
I would definitely love to see that. And I think you may have given me an idea for an interactivity thing at our in-person June annual conference.
I can pull it up while you're talking. I'll pull it up and share it and just kind of scroll through the pictures of it. It's very powerful. I think everybody did a great job.
Wonderful. No, I love that. That's wonderful. And that's the kind of thing, like if you're gonna get a meeting with a staffer or with a member of Congress, that kind of succinct, short description of who you are is a great way to introduce yourself, is a great way to explain sort of who you are, and to really show the yeah, I guess the human side of yourself. And I think that's a very nice icebreaker way to sort of introduce yourself. So, it's, some of it is just getting their attention. Some of it is then just being that constant drumbeat of, this is a topic. Now, you can't be doing that constant drumbeat every day. But, I think, I'll use this as an example. So as I mentioned earlier, we get lists of all the stories that our members are mentioned in, and we send them to the Hill. I do, over the weekend, I'll pull them together, I'll organize them by state alphabetically, and I'll do that. Because I think if I was going to send them up, like sometimes we get them 3 times a week. If I did 3 forwards 3 times a week, the staff would be like, stop bugging me. And it's also not always clear which state it is just from a quick look. But if all you do is open a Word document and you can scroll down and find out where your state is, it's a lot simpler and a lot easier. I hope they look at them all. But sometimes they're only looking for that quick, easy information that's really directly impacting them because it's their constituents, it's from their area. But so I do that once a week, but I think it's an important source of information for the staff on the Hill about what our members are doing, all the great work they're doing, and the issues that they're seeing. So, that could be something. If you see news stories, just that are emblematic, there we go, of the topics you've been talking to them about, cut and paste those into a Word document or something and share it with them and say, hey, want to let you know that this is, we discussed this before, and here's some local news stories on this topic, or showing the problem. So, and once a week, once every other week, those things are great. Again, definitely the August break is usually going to be by far the easiest. But I would say, with the weather not being much better in the south than it is further north, you might be able to do something between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Could also be a time frame they're not around a lot, even other than lately. Congress has been in pretty much up till Christmas. Sometimes early January can be a good time when they're home, but just invite them, create those connections, make them see you as someone that provides good information and stuff. I think says it's downloading something big. I don't think this is my last slide. So if we could move forward.
Computer hanging, right, second.
No problem. I can wait for that other thing to download. if
Well,
that's-
yeah, I know, I think that's what's hanging it up.
Okay, no problem.
And you do have a few more slides.
Okay, I thought so. I didn't think I ended with my owl. So I thought there was some outreach stuff and outreach discussion, which will build nicely off of what we've just been talking about. Oop. Oh, cool. Oh, 6-word memoirs. Awesome.
Can you see that?
Yep, I can see it. Yeah,
Well, it just kind of came up.
that's neat. So who came up with the logo?
We did it as a network.
Very nice. I like it.
So like I said, I'm just going to scroll through these. They have the names on them so everybody can see them. I absolutely love this.
Okay. Off to new adventures.
And this is Eric. I don't know if you were on the line when he mentioned that he does his own artwork.
Here, this is what I find amazing, and this is the, whoops. I can do stick figures, and that is all I've ever been able to do in my life. Maybe a square. And so people that I'm constantly amazed watching people that are able to draw. My kids and are infinitely better artists than I am. Don't mistake my silence for weakness. Yep, I like that one. Faith, hope, love. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they're all a little bit different, but
Yeah.
and you can use your own picture. You can use something else. Yeah, it's personable.
No, that's awesome. That's great. And I think that's also sort of building off of the last speaker. I think, these are great ways nowadays to do, I like that. Not all who wander are lost. Other than there are times that I walk into a room and go, why the heck did I come here?
This is one of my favorites.
That is totally my life. I don't even know if it's organized chaos, though. It might just be chaos is the story of my life.
I like to say it's organized.
Those are awesome. Is it possible you could email that to me? If that's okay. I mean, because this is personal for the people that did it.
Well, everybody's on the line if they don't mind sharing.
Is great. Melvin. Oh, Melvin Watts. Share away. Thank you. Those are great. That's wonderful.
Well, I think I just clicked out of yours. I'll get it back in a sec.
No problem. Yeah, I really like that. I'm gonna have to.
Our university at UAB, they also have a project to do that on campus, 6-word memoirs. So it's pretty nice.
Okay, since I had this question in my head yesterday, I didn't ask. I know Alabama's mascot. I know Auburn's. I cannot for the life of me remember what UAB's is.
I will show it to you in a second then.
It's a dragon.
It's a dragon?
A
Really?
dragon.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
What usually is like a Chinese dragon.
You're
I
really
hate Andrew.
ruining my thunder. There you go.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
How about that?
I did not know. One of my favorite mascots of all times, and I actually have one of my interns is from his University of California, Santa Barbara, are the banana slugs, which I just think is one of the greatest mascots ever. I'm like, oh, cool, you're a banana slug. But I like the dragon. I just had no clue that UAB was the Dragons. Which then raises the question in my mind of why you're not rolling over Alabama and Auburn because the dragon is infinitely more powerful than.
Yeah, the rock, paper, scissors, huh? Mhm.
Yep. And he's got a name, Blaze the Dragon, even better. Oh, I did. You're right. Rena, that was pretty cool. She had the wings coming out of her head. Okay, so getting to sort of building the relationship. It's what you know, it's who you know, it's how well you know them, and it's how well you keep them informed. I think we've talked about a lot of these things. You guys know the information. You know how something is impacting your life, your family's life, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father. So you have that level of information. Then it's a question of how do you get that information to the people, and use the in power phrase, but the congressional staff, the legislative staff, the members. So then it's like you got to create that relationship with those people, and then it becomes how well you know them. And then the well doesn't necessarily need to be that, they're walking down the street and they see you and they say, "Hey, how you doing?" It's that they recognize the email, they recognize the name. Alabama is going to be infinitely different than South Dakota. Our executive director from South Dakota runs into the U.S. senators in his church like all the time, and sees them on the street and knows them that way. It's just, they're a much smaller state, and you just see those people a lot more than you may see them in Alabama. But it's, if they recognize your name, then they know you well. And that's the important thing. And then, as we talked about, it's how well you keep them informed. Make sure that they're continuing to get updates, make sure that they're continuing to get that local information, the flair, the importance of what this is going to mean to their constituents. And, doing that face to face, doing that, over email, all those things will work. So you got to think about those kinds of things. You guys have the knowledge. You just need to create those connections. You got to get them to recognize that you're a knowledgeable person, and then keep them informed. Next slide. This seems like a very basic, but I just put it there. Power equals relationships. Now, power does not necessarily, you don't need to think about it as you're controlling, or that you are, the be all end all. The power is your information. The power is that the person recognizes you, and the power is that they're looking at that information and thinking about it. You may not always get the exact response as quickly as you want, but the more you're providing them the information, the more that they're thinking about it, it's in the back of their minds. And so that when the opportunity presents itself, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we've heard about this. We know about this. We know someone to talk to about this." And so information is another phrase. Information is power, and that power can create relationships. Next slide. So this is an extremely powerful question. Will you support my issue? And it's powerful when asked by someone who has a relationship with you. So when going back to you provide them a lot of information, but you've got to have that ask. And the ask is going to be even more powerful when they know of you as someone that provides good information, provides them a relationship, and is willing to be helpful and really a sounding board of solutions and things. So you've got their attention at that point. You form that relationship. That question is going to, one, trigger all the information you've given to them before, so that they know why you're asking it. They know the importance of why you're asking it, and they know what the outcome is going to be if they do it. So it's that providing the information gives you the power, which gives you the relationship, which then allows you to ask this question. And when you have that relationship, it's going to get you that yes, no, or maybe. And then hopefully it's more yes. But then you can work on the no and maybes. Next slide. So building relationships. You've got time plus energy plus knowledge plus, and this is the big one, is the patience. The patience is going to come about because policy work takes a long time. It is not a short kind of thing that, you know, Monday you show up, you say, this is very rare. It happens every once in a while, but even when you see it happening, even if you see a bill that's been introduced and then it passes lickety split and is done a week later, there have been months and months and months of negotiations. Like, for example, the omnibus appropriations, which was all the appropriations bills that funded the federal government for this year that finally passed in March, basically was introduced on a Monday, and I think had passed both the House and Senate by that Friday. Sort of surprised me how quickly that happened, but it did. But there are like 4 months, 5 months worth of negotiations that had been going on behind that. So just because it was introduced and passed in a week's time doesn't mean that hasn't been a lot of time and energy that has gone into it. But that's a rare occasion. Usually this takes multiple years. It takes a while to get stuff done. So you just have to be patient. And so you've got to put in a little bit of time. You've got to put in a little bit of energy, your knowledge, your information, and you've got to be patient with them. And the patience is not only that it's going to take a while, but the patience is going to be, there are going to be votes. There's going to be times where you vehemently disagree with what they've said and what they've done on another topic. You got to be, you know, that's going to happen. And you just have to accept that every once in a while, there's going to be stuff you don't agree with them on. It's just that you hope them to get them to do what you need on the topic that you're interested in. So you got to use those things to build that relationship. Next slide. So then let me do it this way, and we'll not go to the next slide yet. So I'm going to ask this question of the group and see what people think of. Which is better, a phone call, an email, a letter, a face-to-face meeting, social networking sites, old-fashioned networking? Is there one that you think is better than the other? And then I'll go to I don't think it's my last slide, but if people have a thought on one being better than the other. Okay, Nancy, I have never heard of the Fighting Okras before. I'm going to have to look that one up.
You want them to put it in the chat? Just put it in the chat.
Chat or saying it, I don't, either way is fine by me. If
I'm going to say all of the above.
Okay, who was that? I'm sorry.
This is Kim.
Okay. Kim, any thoughts from anybody else?
This is Jenny. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. I was going to say face-to-face meetings are probably the most powerful because people can see you face-to-face, and it's body language as well as the inflection of the tone of the voice.
Okay.
I was going to agree with her. That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Because you remember people's faces.
Yep. Okay.
And I'm Joanne Mulan. I was also going to say face-to-face. I think all of them work, but I think face-to-face, if you're dealing with an issue that's personal, like if you have a child with a disability and they're the person actually speaking on behalf of themselves or the person that's caring for them.
Awesome.
I agree with them. I say face-to-face meeting because it's allowed people understand what we are and what you believe in. Like the difference between communication and electronic communication.
Okay.
And like you were saying about the picture, is worth 1,000 words or whatever, the person and that door. I'm assuming if you can have the person with you that you're advocating for, or that particular disability, that would be memorable.
Okay. Any other thoughts before I go to the next slide? We'll wait for the count of 5. So the answer you're going to get from me, and I'll dig into this a little bit more, is, I think the next slide says it, is it's a little bit more Kim's, but let me explain why the answer is all of them. So the answer is stay in touch as much as you can. Provide them the information, and so you can use all of those forms of outreach to do that. So use every arrow in your quiver, use every way to touch them. But I fully and utterly agree, and as I've said, I think over the course of the 2 days, that face-to-face meeting with individual staff members to sort of dispel those kinds of things are critically important. So you have to use all of them, but you're not going to get a face-to-face. You may get it once, you may get it twice every year if you're pretty lucky. It may just be once every other year. And that's where all of the other arrows come into effect, which is you got to keep your name there. You got to keep them yourself as a source of information. So I think those face-to-face meetings are critically important, especially for people with disabilities, to really overcome any prejudice, stigma that the individual may have on disability. But to make sure that they remember who you are and the information and the topic you're concerned about and potential solutions, that's where all of those other things come into play. And being there, because as I said, you may get a meeting once, maybe twice a year if you're extremely lucky. More likely that it's going to be every other year. So keeping them informed, reminding them of who you are, that's why using all of them is critically important. But I very much agree that you've got to shoot for those face-to-face. You've got to have that discussion with them so that they see the individuals that this topic is really impacting very strongly. So it's sort of, I'm giving a sort of a wishy-washy answer. You need to do all of them, but if I was going to say the one that you need to be shooting for and getting is that face-to-face at some point to really make that connection with the individual, with the member. Next slide. So the keys to improving public policy, develop your message, have a point and get to it. We talked about that through the message box, all those kinds of things. Deploy your message, use the different ways that exist nowadays, social media, phone calls, letters, in face-to-face, all these kinds of things to get your message out after you've developed it. And 3, remember the power of the question mark. You've got to ask something that makes them have to answer yes, no, or maybe. You've got to have a solution and ask them to support it. It's what you know, who you know, how well you know them, and how well you keep them informed. So those relationships matter. That's when you use all of those different kinds of things. Letter, call, visit. Everything is an opportunity. I have no idea where my mind was on that last one. Everything is an opportunity for using another. So use them all. Do the letters, do the calls, do the visits. Try to do everything as much as you can. But have, again, you got to think about that message. You got to think about a concise message. You got to think about what that ask is. Make sure you get that ask out there. Get them to say yes, no, or maybe. That then allows you to get a yes, you're in great shape. If you get a no or maybe, make sure you do the follow-up question of what are the concerns, what are things that need to be addressed, you got to keep just getting information from them so that you can think about how you want to address these concerns, things that maybe need to be done. Use yourself, use your coalitions, use others to convey your message to them as much as humanly possible. So maybe you're not the only person saying it, and so they think that there's a broader spectrum of individuals that are concerned on this. And do everything that you can. You want to be that constant drumbeat in their mind of, this is a topic that needs addressing, this is what needs to be done, and go forward. So I think that might be it. Is there another slide?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Got some more slides.
I forgot the real world examples. So when you're doing one-on-one meetings with legislators or staff, some meetings are about client stories. Some are all a technical discussion about the legislation, or sometimes they're a little of both. It is always helpful, and I think we wrote this as clients, and I should have changed this. The clients were written from the P&A perspective, but I would say it's helpful to have individuals and family members there. Because again, it's the face-to-face meeting, it's getting them to understand and see you as the person, and hearing it directly from the individuals and their family members are very important. Some can be in district offices. You can have town halls somewhere in the district, and some might be in the Capitol. If you come up to Washington, D.C., you might have a meeting in the Capitol or one of their Hill offices. Take those meetings wherever they are. Sometimes it can be a heck of a lot easier to make that first face-to-face connection at town halls, because raise the issue, track down the staff that are staffing that town hall for the member, ask for a meeting then, but that can be sort of your first. Sometimes it's easier to get those meetings in the state when the member comes back during one of those breaks. You can reach out to the state offices and say, I'm interested in, a group of us, I am interested, a group of people are interested coming in and talking to the senator or the representative on X. And that can be a good way. And then if you come up, as I said, to Washington, D.C., if you're coming up, your delegation is potentially, you could do in a day. It's getting close to a little too big to do in one day, but could definitely be one that's done in 2 different days if you wanted to see them all. If you wanted to pick and choose certain members, that can definitely be done in the day. Next slide. Nope. Okay, I had one more question. Any last questions or thoughts? I do not want to run over today because I will be shot by the group. No, I'm kidding. Oh, very quiet. Has there been, what have you felt like, did you notice a difference between the state legislators and the federal legislators in their discussion, or did you guys not see much of a difference between the presentations of the two? Sort of.
Well, I'll say that we had state legislators actually attend. I mean, we were close by with our location. They attended and came themselves, and very interactive. The federals, it's the staffers, and it's a different level of busy and whatever. But
what I would, so it sounds like you guys have sort of restarted this program recently. So this may be one of those things that make that constant, like if, as you continue it and grow it and keep it going, have that connection with someone in the federal offices now, and sooner or later you might actually get them to participate. The more they hear about you, the more they know about you, the more they know that this is going to be occurring, then it gives you a better shot at getting the legislator, the congressman, congressperson, or the senator to come. So I wouldn't hold that quite yet, but just keep making the asks. And as you grow this program over time, I think you'll have a good shot at getting there to have one of them come. Well, I don't want to hold you up, and I don't really have any more words of wisdom to pass along. Other than I really do appreciate the opportunity for us at NDRN and me and my staff to come talk to you about these things. I think I left my emails, or all of our emails, in the chat yesterday. Linda, feel free to share our emails with the group also, or James. And feel free to reach out to us with questions. If you're in DC at any point, would love to have lunch or see you, meet you face to face.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a great weekend. Your staff is amazing. We appreciate it immensely.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I truly mean this. This program is a great program, and growing the next generation of sort of advocates and people to make the case for changes that need to occur is critically important. And so we love doing these kinds of things, because the more we can empower you to make your cases and help make your case for these changes, that's what I think is ultimately going to do it. It's nice, and we do what we can, but without the stories, without your advocacy, that's the things that I feel like are going to get us over the finish line. I say this to our members all the time, which is, we're here in DC. We can make those connections. We can do that. What they want to hear from is, they want to hear from the constituents and the people that are impacted. And that's you as the Protection and Advocacy Agency. So we'll lay the foundation. You guys need to come in and get that push over the finish line to get it done, because we're the evil lobbyists. I'll say it that way. I don't agree with that, but that's, but some people will look at it that way, and they look at the constituents very different. My interns have really seen, during our spring CEO meeting, they will go with executive directors to meetings on the Hill. And they have said over the years that they can see a very different interaction between the staff and the constituent it's not a bad interaction between us and their staff, but it's a very different interaction in how they pay attention to an issue. So use these lessons, go forth, try different strategies. And as I said, if you're in DC, we'd love to meet you face to face. I keep trying to delay until 3 o'clock, and I'm not getting there.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks to you and all your team.
No, I appreciate James really being asked, and more than happy to do this in the future for any groups that you would like us to.
Next year.
Okay. Everybody else have a wonderful weekend. Best of luck with everything going forward. And hopefully at some point we'll see you here in DC.
Yeah.